All right, so to continue, I have my strong acid, strong base titration curve. Again, a strong acid is being titrated with a strong base. On my x-axis, I have amount of sodium hydroxide added, and on my y-axis, I have my pH. Again, I start as a low pH. You're erasing, just taking the table. Sorry. All right, so I start as a low pH because my solution should just be acid when I start my titration. Now, before I get to the equivalence point, I should have a relatively low pH, or at least lower than 7, because before my equivalence point, number of moles of sodium hydroxide added is still less than the total number of moles of hydrochloric acid that I started with. If I have more hydrochloric acid in solution, I have hydrochloric acid constantly producing H3O+. I'm going to produce H3O+ until I have completely neutralized all of that acid with base. So, if I now look at the species present before the equivalence point, I should realize that, well, some of it has been neutralized to form water and salt, if I'm adding sodium hydroxide, but I will still have H3O+ present, meaning I should have a pH lower than 7. Now, at the equivalence point, again, number of moles of sodium hydroxide is equal to number of moles of hydrochloric acid. The species present for a strong acid, strong base should be water and salt, because I've completely neutralized my solution. Now, after my equivalence point, the number of moles of sodium hydroxide, if I keep adding sodium hydroxide, I now have more moles of sodium hydroxide than I have of hydrochloric acid. So, the species present at that point would again be salt and water because I neutralized all of that acid, but I now have hydroxide being formed from sodium hydroxide, my strong base. So, my equivalence point is the big key to look at here. Before my equivalence point, I have more acid than base. After my equivalence point, I have more base than acid. So with that in mind now, we're going to start talking about weak acid and weak base titration because they've got a little bit of a different story.